Hello, today we'll look at growth and development in living organisms. Now, in Form 1, we had learned that growth is a characteristic of all living organisms. Now, we want to look at the concept of growth and development. Now, you find that most multicellular organisms start life as a single cell, and they gradually grow into complex organisms with many cells. And for the organism to have many cells, it will involve cell division. So when we have cell division in place, there will be an increase in the number of cells. So by this process, by cell division, it will always lead to multiplication of cells. Another thing that we need to look at, we should understand the meaning of growth. Now, growth as a characteristic of a living organism, this is a quantitative permanent increase in size of an organism, and we should look at the aspects of growth. What do we need for growth to take place? Number one, what will always happen is that the cells of an organism will always assimilate nutrients. So we have nutrient assimilation. Now when they assimilate the nutrients, this one will lead in the increase in mass of the cells. Then another aspect which will always take place, we will have cell division by a process known as mitosis. Now when the cell divides, it will lead to an increase in the number of cells. Then lastly, we have cell expansion. We have cell expansion. Now, when we look at cell expansion, it will always lead to enlargement and increase in volume and size of an organism. So in this area, we find that the organism will be enlarged. There will be an increase in size and volume, of the organism. Then another thing you will note that when we have an increase in size and volume of this organism, it will always make us to be in a position to measure the aspects of growth, or we talk about parameters of growth. So when we look at parameters of growth, one, we will look at mass. So we can always determine change in mass within an organism. We can also look at volume. We have surface area. We also have height. So you realize that due to cell expansion, we mentioned that there will always be an enlargement, an increase in size, and even volume. And by that, we are able to examine growth in a living organism, such that we are able to look at the different parameters of growth, and that is mass, volume, surface area, and height. Now we move to the other part, and that is now development. Now when we look at development, you realize that it is a qualitative aspect. of growth in which we have differentiation of cells within the body, and it also involves the formation of various tissues in the body to perform special functions. So you'll realize that with development, it is always not possible to measure the aspects of development, because it is always quantitative. It is always quantitative. Sorry, it is always qualitative. Now, this therefore means that it can be assessed in terms of increase in complexity within an organism. So this might involve a development of leaves, flowers, and even roots. So you'll realize that a mature human being always have millions of cells, but in reality they started as a single cell, that is from a fertilized egg. Now during sexual reproduction, an ovum will always fuse with the sperm cell, and fertilization will always take place, and it will lead to formation of a zygote. Now the zygote, within the zygote, you will come to realize that the zygote will always divide rapidly. So when it divides rapidly, the cells will always increase in number by the process of cell division, and that is mitosis, but there will be no increase without an increase in the size of cell. So as the zygote undergoes rapid cell division, there will be an increase in the number of cells, but the size of the cell will always remain constant. So it will not have a change in cell. For example, this is what always happens when the zygote divides. Maybe it will divide into 2, then followed simultaneously to 4, then followed to we'll be having the next one, we have 8. So each value you multiply it by 2. So then in this case we have 16, and so on and so on, until it reaches the end of cell division. Now when it divides, what we will have in place, or we'll be having a mass of cells referred to as morula. A mass of cells referred to as a morula. Now, the type of this type of cell division, the first cell divisions, we refer to it as cleavage. So this is where we have the first cells are dividing, or they are undergoing cell division. Now, with the time, we'll have morula undergoing development, and it will develop a hollow part, resulting into a structure called blastula, or what is commonly known as blastocyst. Or you talk about blastula. So when we look at blastula, we get it from the development of the morula, whereby it forms a mass of hollow structure. The morula becomes hollow, then from there it forms a blastocyst. Now with the time, the morula cells will always differentiate into 2, and that is the inner layer and the outer layer. So the inner layer will always refer to it as endoderm, and the outer layer will always refer to it as ectoderm. So the 2-layered embryo will now attach itself on the uterine wall, and that is where it will be obtaining the nutrients, just as we had explained earlier, that for growth to take place, nutrients are required, then later it will undergo cell division, cell expansion, and the rest. So after the two-layered embryo has attached itself on the uterine wall, what will happen is that the embryo will always obtain nutrients from the within the uterine wall, that is from the bloodstream. Then after that, growth and development will start to take place within that embryo. So if we have changes that are occurring in the cell sizes, actually when we have a change in size within the cell, at that point we'll be talking about growth. But when we have a change in the cell types, then we'll be talking about development. So you find that the process will always lead to morphological and physiological changes in the developing young organism, resulting into an adult that is more complex and efficient. Now, you find that in early stages of development of the embryo, what will always happen is that all the cells of the embryo will always look alike. But as development process continues, the cell will always begin to undergo differentiation and it become more specialized into different tissues that later perform different functions. Now, when we look at growth, actually growth involves the synthesis of growth involves the synthesis of new materials and protoplasms within the cells. Now, for growth to take place, or for synthesis of these new materials to take place, nutrient is always required. So there must be a continuous supply of food, oxygen, water, and even optimum temperature, or we can talk about warmth. And also, by that, there must be a continuous means of removing the waste products, because as the cells respire, oxygen will be used, but we must have the waste, which will be the carbon dioxide, that when allowed to accumulate within the cells, then it might reach toxic levels, which may tamper with the normal functioning of the cell. Now, another thing, you realize that in animals, growth will always take place all over the body, but at different rates. So when we have growth taking place, it is taking place in all body parts, but at different rates. And that is why in most cases, you cannot find the left hand being longer than the right hand, or even one leg being longer than the other leg. So as growth takes place, it takes place throughout the body parts, but at different rates. So you cannot find somebody growing as big as you know, you call them what? As big as even elephants. But you find that the ants are still not formed. Now, another thing is that in plants, growth and development will always take place at what we refer to as apical meristems. So when we look at apical meristems, these include apical meristems. These include the root tip and shoot tip. These are the growth regions in plants. So that is where actually in plants where growth takes place. So the root tip, we just find it behind the root caps. If you refer to the structure of the root hair, of the root, in Form 2, when you are looking at transport, you will be in a position to locate where we have the root cap. So the root tip is just found behind the root cap. Now the shoot tip, we always find it at the apex of the stem. Now what happens is that when growth takes place at these 2 points, that is root tip and the shoot tip, that kind of growth will always refer to it as apical growth. So this apical growth will always result into lengthening of the plant. So in most cases, you find that the plants, there will always first an increase in height. So the height will always increase. Then later, there will be an increase in the width. Now, another thing is that after apical growth, which is referred to, which can also be referred to as primary growth, will always have secondary growth, whereby the plants grows sideways, and this will always lead to an increase in girth, or what we refer to as width. Increase in width, or you talk about girth. So when we have an increase in width or an increase in the girth, this will always be due to cambium cells. So when we have cambium cells undergoing growth and development, it will always lead to an increase in the girth. And this one, we've said that, or we can refer to it as secondary growth. We've said that secondary growth takes place due to the activity of cambium cells. So at the end of the day, you'll realize that in plants, growth takes place first within the root tip and the shoot tip, and this leads to lengthening, or what we refer to as primary growth. Then later we have secondary growth, which involve an increase in girth, and this we refer to it as secondary growth due to activity of cambium cells. Now, thank you for watching. Remember to like, subscribe as we continue looking at growth and development. Thank you.